Hey folks, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. How you doing, everybody? Today on the show is bassist Jim Kerwin. Jim Kerwin is graduated from San Francisco State with a performance degree in double bass. He has toured Europe with an avant-garde jazz trio led by Larry Blackshear. He has performed bluegrass music with bluegrass greats such as Red Allen, Del McCoury, and has played Carnegie Hall with Stefan Grappelli and Yo-Yo Ma. So Jim Kerwin has a very extensive, covers a lot of ground there. He's from avant-garde jazz to bluegrass, and we talk about some of that. Jim has played with David Grisman for over 30 years, including all the recordings with Jerry Garcia. In the interview and talk with Jim Kerwin, I mess up Jerry's name, and so I want to apologize for that and just call myself out for being a D-bag kind of up front. Yeah, so that's that. That's Jim Kerwin, and it was a great talk. I had a great talk with him, and he's coming from this kind of very organic place of being very centered within himself and kind of taking a lot of the energy that he gets off of an audience and a crowd and absorbing that and putting it into the music, and we talk about a lot of those things. We talk about a lot of different aspects of kind of the humanity of music. And this was a really long conversation. Some of it got recorded, some of it didn't. But when I spoke with Jim, this is a few weeks ago. When I spoke with him, I mean, it must have been like 3.5 or 4 hours or something. It went on for a long time. And so here's kind of the back half of that conversation. And he does say something very important that I want to bring up right now. Towards the end of the talk with him, he's got a great quote. It's his quote. I'm quoting him, and I think it's great. What he says is, here's the quote: "Not make things so important that I'm going to be disappointed if they don't come out the way I'm perceiving it to be." I'm going to say that again. Not make things so important that I'm going to be disappointed if they don't come out the way I'm perceiving it to be. He's talking about expectations. He's talking about keeping things kind of with a realistic approach to what you want out of something and what it can offer. Not in any kind of way to like how you can use a situation for personal gain, but that's not at all. That's not at all what he's talking about. He's talking about expectations and keeping things in perspective. And usually I talk about kind of these things that people say at the end of the episode, and I will also talk about this one probably at the end of the episode as well, but I wanted to really highlight that. I loved it, and after he said it, it had been rattling around in my head for the next few days, and it's just it's a great mindset to keep things in perspective, to check in with yourself about what your expectations within the situation are, and that situation could be anything, obviously. But I definitely wanted to give that a little bit of time on the front end of the episode. So he does talk about that towards the end of the episode. And if you are enjoying the Bass Shed podcast, please go to bassshed.com/podcast and click the donation button to keep this thing happening. You can add with it any note you'd like me to read online. I will give a big thank you and read any links or any messages from donors on the mic here. So if you have a YouTube channel you want to plug or an Instagram thing or whatever, include some media links that you'd like me to give you a shout out. And that will happen for any and all donors. Thank you for keeping this thing happening. And here's my talk with Jim Kerwin. So you're at San Francisco State.
Well, I could tell you that basically Charles Ciani was the motivator, kind of in a negative way, to get me out of myself. But it wasn't until I started taking a yoga class right before his lessons.
Okay.
So I after that I could then come into a class. I mean, he'd be into these little rehearsal studios, smoking a cigarette, and one after the other, bass players would be coming out of there totally sweating and in tears.
Yeah.
Tear them apart. But I would then, once I started doing the yoga, I started then coming in and actually not worrying about the part of the music that I knew I couldn't play. I just got into the music and played for him. And so it all changed for me, and he noticed. And
Yeah.
it didn't take long for him to go, I'm going to put you into the performance major. But I had already done all the program. I was ready to get my degree in theory and music history, which I didn't really want because I didn't want to become a teacher. I wanted to be a performer.
Right.
Anyway, he put me in the performance major category, and I started then playing in all the orchestras and the opera orchestra and the chamber music and doing regular recitals. And that was what changed it all for me. And I finally I did graduate there with a performance degree, and it took me 6 years of San Francisco State because I had to make it up at the end. But then I went directly from San Francisco State playing classical solo music to playing with the Larry Blackshear trio in Europe. And it was and then after 5 years after that, I just started playing with David Grisman through another kind of set of circumstances. And it's not that I left any of the other stuff behind. It just kind of enhanced it, and I grew from there. But it was the realization that practice, something like yoga, a relaxation practice, could make it happen where I could actually, if I could play for Charles Siani under that kind of pressure, that meant I could play for anybody at any time. And when Larry Blackshear, in the middle of a concert, said, "Okay, Jim, play an unaccompanied solo. It's all yours," I just kind of went into that space that I knew that I could do, and find that inner self that motivated to me to come up with ideas and make it happen. So yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like that's the process to kind of really get into being able to this this quality that you spoke to of really connecting with the audience, and where you feel completely lifted and maybe, for the lack of a better word, maybe this is the right word, I don't know, empowered by it, and you feel empowered by and inspired by the connection with the audience. And so it's almost like you gained that while learning the bass. So it's a very tandem relationship of learning the instrument and also learning how to let go.
Yeah, it's all connected to just my own journey as a human being, and feeling comfortable with the anxiety of things. Sure. As a matter of fact, and that really came from the death of my mother and being very close to her at the end, and her preparing me to move on, because life throws things at you and it continues to throw. I then
stop.
I'm sorry?
I said it's nonstop. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And that's what happened next to me, is that I got married and had 2 kids, and then my wife got cancer. And I went through that whole world, and I was taking her to the same hospitals and, for radiation treatments that I did when I did with my mother 10 years or so before. And I had already moved past that, and used music to kind of push me forward through the grief. But as it was happening to my wife, I was drawing on the strength that my mother had given me, which is, you can make your way through this. This is the human experience. This is what we deal with. Death is just part of it.
Absolutely.
And so that's really, that's the biggest fear or anxiety causer that humans deal with, is death, or the death of a loved one. And
sure.
And as a matter of fact, that is almost the same as walking on stage, like into a black hole, just stepping off and feeling that you're going to land somewhere. You're going to make this happen. This is good.
Yeah.
You're going to, and so learning that skill, or at least that realization about the human condition, can get you through anything. I mean, that's how I matured into a person. I mean, I'm not I'm not a perfect human being, but
Well, sure, yeah.
but I've used those experiences, that experience with humanity or my own humanity and mortality,
Yeah.
to then create hopefully really good music and connect with humans and other spirits. I mean, the human spirit.
Yeah, I think, and having having gone through some things I've gone through personally, which are in chronological order, I guess. There was, when in my 20s, I was in this really bad car accident that was not my fault, and I had four brain hemorrhages and in a coma, and the doc said, like, if I came out, I'd be a vegetable the rest of my life. Wow. Which is, yeah, it's kind of heavy, and it's like I don't remember any of it. Like, I remember leaving the gas station right before the accident occurred, and then I remember waking up in the hospital complaining about a gig.
Yeah.
So clearly I was still as I was. Yeah, but having to walk through that, and that was interesting. And then, one of my best friends committed suicide. And he was a brilliant individual, and in my opinion, the best saxophone player in Los Angeles, hands down. That, and then there's that, and then having to grieve a divorce later that year, and dealing with the idea of loss, and some of those things were actual loss. Me being in the hospital wasn't a loss, but being confronted with, I guess, mortality on a level. And through it all, I think for me, a constant that's always been in my life has been music. Music's always there. Music's the security a lot of times. And then you keep it's always there. It's always there, and it doesn't disappoint. Like, I can disappoint myself within music, but music doesn't disappoint.
Yeah. You're never supposed to expect that it's going to do anything. It is what it is. Yeah.
It's just a straight reflection, and learning aspects of humanity that were interesting at younger ages, and I do believe it has a really pronounced effect on artistry and how people not only approach the world, but approach playing music, and what their value system then is within music. Because it's not on the individual instrumentalist and being the baddest on the instrument, and all the things we might have been hungry for in the early days of our playing.
Yeah.
But going through life and really dealing with humanity, on humanity's terms.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about basically is empathy.
Yes.
For everyone else, and that's what makes a good bass player.
I completely agree. And I think it's fascinating, and it's I think that's what creates a great musician on any level. I think as a bass player, we're confronted with having to deal with empathy maybe more than other instruments. Because we have to be there for everybody, whereas a singer still has a bass player behind them, or if you're in a jazz quartet or something, a horn player still is on top of the band being supported by others. They don't have the support role that we do, or other members of the rhythm section do. But having to live the life that'll condition you to really be empathetic. There's no better training than that. Not that I would have chose any of those things for training musically, but now that that's what happened, I'm not mad at it. It's I think everything has its place, no matter how much it sucked at the time. Right.
Yeah, and also basically you learn not to fear the unknown.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a
Yeah.
big one. What kind of things besides playing with Grissom right now? What other musical projects are you involved with?
Well, playing with the Nell and Jim band
Yeah.
is kind of like the main outlet that I'm doing professionally right now because, well, up until this COVID-19,
Right.
we were playing regularly and had a huge new touring schedule, which included 2 tours to Europe this summer.
Oh wow.
That will not happen now. It'll be postponed, but who knows what the climate for for live music is going to be.
Yeah.
But I'm still in that band, and we just completed this great record called Western Sun,
Okay.
and it has there's a tune on it that I wrote, and it's a nice bass feature, so I'm kind of like I'm very happy to be in that band. Um, it's another genre, almost not completely than everything else that I play.
Yeah.
I mean, it includes an accordionist,
Okay.
but the drummer is really a jazz drummer, and but he's playing like myself to fit whatever whatever the. It's a very eclectic band, I got to say. It's really hard to categorize us, but we are more, I guess you would call it Americana, but that's just another terminology for, well, whatever. That's really what I've been putting most of my professional time into. But I'm also learning. I'm learning. I mean, I've been putting together bass fiddle tunes where I find tunes. Well, sometimes they're American fiddle tunes that I reinterpret on the bass using a bow.
Okay.
And
Cool.
but it's not always American tunes. I've worked on Irish tunes and just did a Norwegian tune, and I'm kind of creating a repertoire of short little bass features. Of most of it is unaccompanied bass, and that's all coming from my experience learning the Bach cello suites, or some of them,
Sure.
back in college. When I was studying with Charles Ciani, that's where I gained a love for what you can do on the bass. I always have been interested in playing lyrically on the bass. So trying to play melodically, there's a lot of that in classical music, particularly in chamber music and solos for bass. And then I've played transcriptions of cello music or even oboe music or whatever, and find a way to. I mean, I'll hear a beautiful melody on the oboe and sit down and try to, how am I going to make that work on the bass?
Yeah.
So that's something that I spend a lot of time doing, and I have a lot of this written out, and eventually this might be a book of some sort or some kind of way of getting this out there on the written page. But also, I'm inspired by various people. There's someone on Facebook. His name is Lloyd Goldstein, and he regularly posts his solo bass playing, and they're beautiful pieces. They're like little 2 and 3 minute pieces, and they're exactly what I am working on myself. But he's like really advanced. He studied with Francois Rabath,
Sure.
and he's just an exquisite player. He also plays with Marty Balin. So and he also plays for people that have cancer. I totally resonate with this guy. Check out Lloyd Goldstein. And
Okay.
I've learned some of the pieces that I've sat down with a video and wrote out the notes and the bowings. So he inspires me. Things like that. So I'm continually inspired to break the rules
Yeah.
that I learned from Charles Ciani, just like Eddie Gomez told me,
Yeah.
learn the rules and then you can break them. And yeah, playing like the Bach cello suites taught me, and playing them in the register of the cello. You learn to play up in the thumb position, um, in that register, and then all of a sudden you realize, and also a cello suite is a dance tune, and it is something where you're playing all of the harmony because you're accompanying yourself.
Yeah.
Well, that's what fiddle music is. They're dance tunes, and you're playing the chords as well. That's so that I'm just continually fascinated with what I'm going to try to do next on the bass.
That's it's cool. It's cool that I'm always fascinated when I talk to musicians and to hear about what they're up to present day and how it connects to these early years of their musicianship, because it seems like what you spoke about just now goes all the way back to your first guitar lessons at 13 and your guitar teacher being into Chet Atkins and accompanying himself. Like your early kind of exposure to this thing was on the ground zero of your career. Like the first time you're in guitar lessons, you're exposed to these ideas, and now fast forward through this whole journey, it kind of brings you back, or not brings you back, but it's been with you throughout all of this, and now you're bringing that forward. I think you're bringing it forward is a better way of thinking about it than going back.
Yeah, right. Well, in my case, that isn't the case. It's what's what my older sisters are playing. No, I laugh about that, but that was the 50s. The culture was so different back then. It was a good time to come up, but also that I went through a huge cultural revolution, and I was at the center of it. And a lot of that revolution had to do with music.
Yes.
I mean, I was not a hippie, but I used to take the Greyhound bus up to Haight-Ashbury and just sit in the Buena Vista Park and just observe. And I just loved it. It was so exciting to see all these people with all these new ideas.
Yeah.
Of freedom and peace and love and anti-Vietnam War, all of those things that basically defined my generation. I didn't participate fully in them all, but I certainly learned a lot from being a spectator.
Sure.
And luckily, I survived it all too. But I still am. I definitely resonate with the hippie world and the revolution that was happening at the time, and of course with what's happening in music through that time. So yeah, I'm very lucky that I've been brought up at this time, and I don't resent the fact that I didn't have those kind of musical opportunities. I mean, I kind of did when my mother finally gave me, let me go take some guitar lessons. That was something new, but because they didn't have any sense that I would. Boy, I was really fighting against all odds to have a vocation in music.
Sure.
They told me.
How was that perceived? No, your mom was very cavalier about making sure that you pursued your passion. How was that responded to kind of within the immediate culture of your family when you're like, yeah, okay, I'm doing this? Was it well received? Was it maybe like someone doesn't understand the occupation, so it was just like, well, you sure you wanted to be doing that, but what's your backup plan?
Yeah, I didn't get much pressure to do so much. I think my parents were just kind of like, oh, whatever. But hey, they were also dealing. My father had cancer before and survived.
Okay.
They were dealing with a lot of heavier things.
Sure.
My mother's brother had alcoholism, and I could just see that there were lots of distractions that they were dealing with, and that my life, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do. That was all part of being living in the '60s as well.
Sure.
And that the fact teenagers and young people all of a sudden had a voice.
Yeah.
We could protest the Vietnam War, and so many things were happening. I remember going to demonstrations in Berkeley and things like that. And I was just a kid. But I lived in a remarkable time, and I found my way through it.
Yeah, and geography wise, like you're a little bit of kind of a hub, or an epicenter for it. Like you're in the Bay Area, like man, you're in it. Like you're in it. That's amazing. Like if you're gonna do the '60s, like that's the spot to do them.
I was in a great spot, right?
Yeah, that's amazing, and just what all that energy must have felt like, and everybody, the exchange of music and ideas, and that's fascinating. Like I think about that a lot, and I've thought about that in relation to. I haven't not thought about you growing up in relation to COVID-19, but I've thought a lot about cultural shifts a lot. Because we're in one. We're at the start of one right now. Like there's no, I don't know if there's any necessarily coming back from this. It'll just be something new on the other side.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's interesting because the last time something, I don't know, that's a different conversation that could go a lot of places. But you look at like a cultural shift similar to the internet, and when the internet happened, there was no going back to life pre-internet. It's just life after the internet now.
Yeah, a paradigm shift.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think we're at the beginning of another one now, and that's interesting. What I did want to talk about is kind of, that's where my mind's been at with a lot of the COVID things, is we're at the beginning of this new cultural shift, paradigm shift, all of it. Like life is not going to be different after this. How did it feel to go through the 60s in the Bay Area? Then you're confronted with another cultural shift of the internet in the 90s. And then, 30 years after that, we're kind of doing it again. How have you had to like kind of draw on previous experiences to like navigate the new ones that have come up?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Speaking of the internet or technology, digital technology, I've reluctantly learned how to deal with it.
Sure.
And because I'm really much more of an analog type person, not necessarily a Luddite, but it's taken me a long time to get up to speed of some sort to like record myself on my computer I've learned a lot in this COVID-19. It's transformed me a lot. As a matter of fact, I will recommend this organization called musicinplace.org.
Okay.
And there are a bunch of musicians who are successful in other fields who understand the plight of people like myself, musicians that depend on live audiences, and the what we used to depend on, and they realize that people like myself need help stepping up into new technology, and create new situations to make music in. So this really just started about a month or maybe 2 months ago. There's a website called musicinplace.org, and they contacted me and some of the other musicians I've worked with, and helped us get up to speed. Like, for instance, I didn't have an interface, so they bought me an interface and sent it to me.
Wow.
Because they wanted us to record a quartet, a piece, and then they would take the music, and another artist would mix that music and turn it into a video. that they would use to promote music in place and solicit other musicians that were in similar situations that needed to learn how to do this. Use GarageBand and record yourself, and then video yourself, and then send the two files to someone else that put them all together.
Sure.
So this happened within a week. It was really amazing how quickly and how much of a learning curve it was for all of us in the band. And one of the players is up in Washington, and the others are just right around here. One of them is actually in Pacifica, my hometown, and the other. Anyway, I will suggest that you look at the video that we made called "The Path," and that was written by the piano player Larry Dunlap, and it was an homage to Lyle Mays, who had just died for that.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful piece. It's really in the style of music that I love playing. I mean, it's really more of a kind of an ECM style, and there's odd meters in it, and it's this extended form, and there's some really beautiful lines. A lot of it's written out, some of it's improvised, and they put it into a beautiful form of video where there's multiple screens and it changes around. It's really well produced, but it was all recorded. Like I did my part right here, recorded on it. So you could see me playing just a few weeks ago. And they've put out a few other videos since then, and they're continuing to solicit players and to solicit donations.
Yeah.
For people that understand the plight of musicians, that they need, we need money and we need to learn how to do this. We need to learn new ways of getting live music out there. So this is the most important thing that I've learned in this COVID-19 era, is that I'm going to have to start trying new things. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of worked out. I mean, I still run into the headache of not understanding the technology, or forgot my password for this or that. and my son lives with me, and he's 28 now, and he, whenever I come into some problem like that, he'll come over and go, okay, well, you just got to do this. Oh,
right.
So there's that. I'm dealing with that, but I'm learning that it's all possible, and you can learn new tricks. And this musicandplace.org really helped that. And they're going to continue to help that, especially if more people, learn, find out about this thing.
Yeah.
And I hope, and they're not like the only thing going. They in fact want other people to do this in their own community. They, it's something, it's a groundswell of an idea. So it's giving a lot of hope to other musicians, and you can get a good idea of what they're doing on their website. And I was very proud to be part of that, and I'm looking forward to the next project that comes up. I've already been contacted by other musicians going, hey, do you have any kind of recording ability at your home? Because I'd like to do a recording with you. And before this, I didn't have that interest to do that. I just played live.
Yeah.
And when I recorded, I went to a recording studio. So now I've got the setup, and I've got the mics, and I can mix myself. I could, all of that stuff. So, and now people are asking me, okay, first of all, I'll send them to Music in Place and see this video that I did. And they'll say, that's exactly what I want to do. Okay, let's do this. So there's a whole new kind of world opening up. And I'm telling you, it's not really what I want to be doing. Because as we talked before, and I was talking about my connection with the audience as being some kind of like thing that stirs my soul, because I feel like I'm touching their soul. Well, it's really difficult to do that in your room,
I definitely agree. I'm involved with something very similar to that called Stuck at Home Records, and they happen every week. And actually, I got to record when we get off the phone with our chat. I have to do my part for this week's, and it's musicians from all over the country that was spearheaded by a piano player named Osamu McGregor, and he just shot out a big email blast to everybody he knew from New York and across the country. And him and I have done some gigs here in LA. And I'm like, yeah, dude, if you're involved, I'm in. You know, it sounds like a fun thing. Let me know. I didn't put too much thought into it. Yeah. And it's every week we get a Dropbox. Here's the band. Here's what day you have to do your part. You know, put your isolated stems, put your band mix, and then put your video, you know, in these 3 separate folders.
Yeah.
And we do it. And it's fun. It's fun. It's fun
Yeah.
to like being able to musically connect with people that you've never, you know, I've never met in real life. I think the drummer this week lives in Philadelphia or something. I don't even know where he's at.
Wow.
And so it's fun. It's fun. And every week you get something else. You know, 1 week there was an odd meter thing and like 11/8 that was fun. Yeah. The week before that is a couple weeks before that, like a cover tune. So it's fun. But I agree with you that you don't feel the air move in real time and you're not connecting in real time. And that's one of the things I love about being a musician is creating in real time with somebody else. And having someone respond to what you're playing or what you just played, and having a conversational, social approach to creating in real time, like that's so important to me, and that's what I feed off of as an individual. Yeah, and this is fun, but it's not that.
I'm learning how deep real time is.
Yeah.
I've heard these discussions lately on latency and all of that, and the problem with this technology and time. And I heard a scientist talking about our capability of, you know, when you're live, when the drummer's right next to you, there are milliseconds of time.
Sure.
that you're not hearing, but you're also seeing it and you're getting all the cues and you're playing together. I never thought of it. I never had to think in those terms.
Right.
But that's in fact a physical scientific thing that can be measured. And
right.
So it's giving me a whole different perspective as to what reality is.
Right.
And then what this artificial reality is, you know, and
sure.
dealing with computer latency and all of that. And you know, and I feel like my creative mind goes, well, maybe we can make free music where we don't really need to know the time, and maybe that's going to be something that we can develop. But anyway, it's not the same as playing with someone on the stage right there, then and there, and I appreciate it much more. All of the things I didn't even think about before.
Yeah, right. Like all of a sudden, like driving to the gig in bad traffic isn't so bad. Like it's put into, you know, like, at least there's a gig to drive to.
I wouldn't go that far, but
what's the culture up there right now? Like, where are you guys? Are you guys still on pretty strict quarantine?
Well, I am in fact. I mean, I'm 67 years old and I'm in really good health, but when I go out, and I do go out, I don't go to the store. My son shops for me. I don't go indoors with a lot of people. I do a lot of biking.
Oh, cool.
Way up in the hills. I have an electric, you know, fat tire bike. Nice. And I go on trails. And that is amazing for me. But if I'm going to go around a lot of people, I wear a mask. And I respect people that do, because it's giving a signal that I'm aware of what's going on, and that in fact I might even be spreading this disease without even knowing it. So there's there's no demonstrations of, you know, people wanting to be free, and you know, there's none of that I've seen locally. This is a pretty aware, but Pacifica is not, well, whatever. It's a cross section of lots of different cultural, you know, backgrounds here. I don't know. When I look at the news and I see stuff that's happening in Michigan and all of that, it really disturbs me that this problem will get worse before we get a vaccine, because there's people that can't take scientific advice for reality. I mean, they're I don't know. It's not really thinking things through. It's just being a ego gut reaction to what they think, and they're listening to all of the wrong people, including our president, about what they think liberty is. Yeah, it's. I'm very happy that I can basically afford to stay home,
Right.
and I'm kind of forced to that because I used to work on doing a lot of jobs other than music, and I guess I could go out and get a job, delivering or something like that. But
Sure.
I'm not. I'm happy to say that I'm not gonna do that or need to do that. And I feel for all of the people that are forced to do that right now. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at. I'm just learning all of the new tricks, how to get stuff delivered, or how to and I'm baking my own bread. I'm doing a lot more cooking. I'm doing all my gardening. I'm doing all of that stuff that I've done before, but now that's taking most of my time.
I would like you to speak to now. I know David Grissom and Joe Garcia. Jerry Garcia, right? There's an old percussion player back in Arizona named Joe Garcia. For some reason, that name's still in my mind. I do that a lot. Yeah, and so you're working with him too, and you've worked with. Talk about that music and the fusion and all the different musical qualities. Speak to that again, so we can have that in here.
Okay, you mean with the Garcia Grisman projects?
Yeah. I liked how you. It was a really short. You got accepted into the project. Now you got tenure, which is amazing. Really quickly, really quickly.
Yeah, that happened actually. The thing with David Grisman, this is before Jerry Garcia, and so this is 1985. I was already connected with the drummer George Marsh, and he's a jazz drummer that played with many people, but Denny Zeitlin, and he's always inspired me. He was actually a teacher of mine, learning how to play jazz.
Okay.
He invited me to a jazz session at his studio with a guitar player, Dimitri Vandelos. And we were playing this really nice jazz, just kind of jamming, playing jazz tunes. And we finished that, and he said, David Grisman, I met him on a plane recently, and he wanted to play with me, so I invited him, and he's coming over this afternoon. Why don't you guys hang out? And we play with David Grisman. I thought, that's great. I had seen David Grisman's quintet play 10 years before at the Great American Music Hall, and I was there with a friend that night, and I said, that's the kind of band I'd like to play with. I think
I played there. A small little place on like the south side of the street.
Yeah, it's not that small, but it's a grand. It was a dance hall, so it has this great ornate interior with a small stage.
Yeah, that one. Okay, now I was confusing that with another place I played on that little tour. Yeah, that's a cool venue. I like that.
Well, David Grisman's quintet played there quite a bit, and that was when their first record came out, and they made a huge splash, playing bluegrass styles with really virtuosic, more jazz-like style. So, and that's what resonated for me when I heard them, because everyone got a space to play a solo. It was more of a jazz thing, but it was a bluegrass thing with mandolin out front. So I was real excited when George Marsh said, "Why don't you stick around? David Grisman's coming over," and I had listened to all of Grisman's records up to that point, but I had kind of stopped listening to that because I was already in Germany playing with, I was touring there quite a bit and playing with Larry Blackshear, playing more free music and all of that. So when David showed up, I immediately gravitated to his stuff. I knew just what his stuff needed, what a bass player should play. So we had a great time. And as it turned out, his bass player at the time, Rob Wasserman, had just given notice, and I didn't know that. But David had been auditioning bass players.
Oh wow!
But he had this session set up with George, and just by fate, George asked me to stick around. Well, yeah. David called me that evening and said, "I'd like you to join my band. Can you learn all this material in 4 days and play a gig, 3 gigs in Arkansas, in Eureka Springs, Arkansas?" And this is September 1985. Okay. And so I learned his tunes. I listened to all of his records, and I put together, I knew what the set was going to be. And I drew up these little charts because he didn't have any charts, but I needed something to learn this by. Anyway, we played the first set, or the first evening, and we're packing up the gear. And he said, "Well, you've got the gig for as long as you want it."
Nice.
And that was
perfect.
36 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was one thing, playing with getting in to play with David, which led me to play on Bluegrass records and to play at all these great Bluegrass festivals, Telluride, Strawberry, many other places that we were playing top bill. All of a sudden, I was in the Bluegrass world and playing quite often top bill at big festivals. So I didn't have to learn. I didn't have to come up, playing in garage bands, playing bluegrass. Right. I had already done that, playing rock and roll and jazz. And all of a sudden I'm just thrown in, and I just kind of like had to figure out how to play, well, simpler and more, to suit what that style demanded of the bass player.
Sure.
So it took some kind of carving out, but I was ready to do that, and my ear was already, kind of ready to do that, and to not. I didn't really think that I had some kind of like, particular egoistic kind of view about how I'm this kind of bass player. No, I just figured I could fit into almost anything. So I did, and that lasted for a number of years, and then Jerry Garcia came into the picture around 1989, 1990, something like that. And they were old friends. Okay. Garcia and David Grisman went way back to the East Coast, where they grew up, and they met each other going to bluegrass festivals and picking in the parking lot. Because Jerry Garcia was quite a banjo player back in the day. He was actually he'd won competitions on banjo.
Oh wow!
So they had known each other a long time, and then had a falling out over some money, I think it was, because David had played on a couple of early Grateful Dead records, and somehow had some kind of money problem that they never figured out. And it wasn't, so it was a kind of a resentment, and then Jerry kind of broke the ice, and they became friends, and they used to just kind of, David had a recording studio in his home, in his basement. So he would just, and Jerry was living, when he wasn't on the road, he was living in Marin. He actually had about 5 mansions at the time. He was an interesting person, for the fact that he was kind of in denial of the kind of money that he had. He didn't really want to think about it or talk about it.
Sure.
He kind of was a reluctant icon of that whole generation.
Sure.
And a very sweet person and a really open-minded musician. He had such broad tastes in music. I remember turning him on to Bill Frisell.
Okay.
And he loved Bill Frisell and the Paul Motian on Broadway records.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of fun, just kind of like seeing that I could actually broaden Jerry's taste. But that's where he was at. But Jerry was really basically, he was like a journeyman musician. He was just always learning new things, working on different projects. He loved working as a musician. So we resonated on that point. But he would just, whenever he had time, he would come over to David's house, and on Jerry's way over, David would call me and Joe Craven, the percussionist and fiddle player. Why don't you come over? Jerry's come on over. Maybe we'll do some recording. So that kind of just built into, maybe we should do a record. And we did one record, intended, and that became the Garcia Grisman record, I think. I think that's all it's called. And I'm very proud of that record. And then we did Not for Kids Only, which became a big seller. And it's what started David's record label, Acoustic Disc, because all of a sudden he had a huge audience of deadheads that wanted to hear this other thing that Jerry was doing.
Right.
And that all came, and the other thing all came from Jerry and David's personal history and common musical history of learning all these old tunes and relearning these tunes, all the way back to sea chanties and old-timey tunes, and then some kids' tunes. And so it was just a very creative scene. That was back during the Gulf War. So that was going on in the news, and we started playing this tune downstairs one day with this kind of Arabic kind of modal sounding melody, and that turned into Arabia, which was this whole kind of epic tune. And I invented the middle part, which is really basically a Cuban folk song that I had been playing solo on the bass, which turned into the middle section of the tune. Nice. We did this groove. I was playing this groove with the drummer while he was playing bongos at the time. And there was this A minor kind of a rock groove. And Jerry and David looked at each other, man, we got to use this. We got to find a tune to make this work, kind of a bluesy tune. How about The Thrill Is Gone? And so we made a version of The Thrill Is Gone with this groove that Joe and I were playing. So that's kind of how a lot of that music came together. It was all just kind of, Jerry was really more of a spontaneous player and spontaneous arranger. It's what defines the Grateful Dead. But David Grisman is kind of more of a intensely arranged kind of person. He'll always find some way to put an ending or a tag or change the key right here or whatever. He always has elaborate arrangements that he loves to invent. But so that was kind of opposites. But as it turned out, Jerry wanted to learn what David was doing, and he'd say, "No, I want to do that." And David would say, "Oh, I don't know, we don't have to do all." Well, no, I want to do that. And as it turned out, they both learned a lot of their personal musical tastes, and David became much more of a free-thinking musician, maybe more of a jammer by playing with Jerry, and Jerry learned to be more of an arranger through David. So that was fun to be part of and see all that. As a matter of fact, there's a really good movie that was made of this whole thing called Grateful Dog.
Okay.
And you can find that on a video, it's on Sony Pictures. And basically it's home movies that that David's daughter and the drummer from Grateful Dead's son, Justin Kirshner, or what's his name, they produced that movie, and it tells the whole story of Jerry and David's history. And there's nice footage of us playing in the studio and at gigs, and so that was a really interesting branching out, and it really helped to put David's quintet on the map, because all of a sudden our concerts, lots more people showed up, and we played bigger halls, and we'd sell out shows regularly. We went through years of full out, just getting great reviews and sell out shows, and we would play a little bit of the repertoire from the Grisman Garcia within our show, but it really was a crossover of audience members. And as a matter of fact, I remember after shows meeting, like the older folks that came to see us play, and their big remark usually was, "We can't believe it, but we learned about your music from our son and daughter, and that's why we're here. But we really love your music, and we never thought we would love something that our kids liked." So that's kind of that was about the best kind of reaction that you can get. So that was pretty much the experience that I had with Jerry, and his death stopped all of that. That was really a tragic thing that happened.
What year was that?
When he died, the 94, 95 maybe. I can't remember now.
Mm-hmm.
I think we played from 90 to 95. I think it was about 5 years that I worked with him. And you can see in the movie Grateful Dog, there's some really great footage where we just had a static camera set up, and they kind of forgot that the camera was there, and it was just Jerry and David talking, and David stepped out of the frame to go make some tea or maybe to roll a joint, and Jerry kind of turns and he's looking out the window, and they're talking about his pressures about being in the band, and he's really looks forward to just coming and playing music and making music this way. And you could see that he was really divided from and under pressure from being in this huge, I don't know what you'd call it, but being an icon of
sure. I mean, that band has a huge cult following, the Grateful Dead, and
the pressure,
Jerry Garcia himself, yeah.
And the pressure of all the people that worked for that band, for Jerry to be healthy and to be there, whereas he kind of really more enjoyed the relaxed nature that David Grisman was providing for him, because David never pressured him to do any music. It was all waiting for Jerry to make the suggestion to do this or that. And like I said, about 5 or 6 records came out, but that was all after his death. Where David kind of like took all of these recordings that we made, and quite often we would just do 1 or 2 takes of tunes, but David kind of made it all work and put out some really great records and kind of put them into genres. That was a very creative time and a little bittersweet from the fact that Jerry wasn't around. But he also showed us that he was, first of all, just a regular guy, but he was in denial of so many things, of his personal health and his personal wealth. It was hard to become that close with him. I mean, I felt like I was when I was around him, but it wasn't the point where I could say, Jerry, maybe it's not a good idea that you show up at David's recording session with 3 bags of Jack in the Box. He would order everything on the menu and show up, and then he would eat it.
Yeah.
And it was like, Jerry, do you know what you're doing to yourself?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
like man, I wonder. I mean, there's questions I'm curious about. But I really don't want to go down too far down this rabbit hole. But because you just said that, I wonder if because of his presence within that band and kind of the times and his age, back in the day when that band really started picking up some steam, if this idea of invincibility just permeated the rest of his life. And when you're young, and I mean, I know I did. We spoke a little bit about this earlier. when I was young and going through some of the things I did, there was a feeling of invincibility there. And maybe everybody in their early 20s thinks that.
Yeah.
And it's not till you really, okay, well, yeah, no, I can't have fast food a couple days, in a row. Like that's not gonna do it. I can't do this like I used to anymore. There becomes that kind of age of accountability where you're like, all right, I gotta think this through and make some adult decisions. And maybe it's because he was caught up in the industry. Maybe those things never landed the same as they would have otherwise. It's an interesting idea, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did have a little bit of discussions with him about maybe possible things that would have, shaped his personality. One being his losing his finger, his also witnessing his father's drowning. I mean, there were some traumas that happened in his life that I think affected his whole being. And then he was on the forefront of the LSD world, and not that that's a bad thing, but there was lots of abuse of that.
Sure.
Not to mention any other drug that came along. He was in denial of a lot of things. I can tell. And the other thing is it's surprising. I don't know how old he was when he died, like 56 or something.
Okay.
He looked a lot older than that. I was really surprised when I learned really what his age was. He lived a full, harsh, long, hard life. And also, I mean, he was still abusing. He was snorting heroin when I knew him, but I didn't know that he was doing that.
Right.
I learned about that in a biography that came out after he passed, and I realized, no, that was the time that I knew him, and that was one of the worst times. So he was, he had various elements of his personality that he didn't share with everyone.
I feel like that denial thing is part of an addict mentality in general. They're first and foremost denial in the way that they're living and what their actual substance issues are and the severity of them. And I think that does manifest in other areas of life. So if it's even denial over wealth, well, it's just because it's because he's fundamentally in denial. So then
and he was,
it's not only wealth, it's going to be Jack in the Box and snorting heroin. Like it's all the same because and I don't want to villainize Jerry Garcia at all. I don't know that much about him, and he is a music icon. And so I don't want to make him a scapegoat or talk down about him and his legacy. But I think anybody that is going to be caught up in substance abuse has a level of denial that they're existing with, and then I'm not putting anybody down for that. I hope that folks can come to, and they can come to in a healthy, safe environment with people around them that love them to bring them up and out.
True.
And that's my ultimate thought on that. What I also wanted to ask is, what was your history like with the Grateful Dead before working with Jerry? Were you a fan? Were you was it kind of like the first time you're in a room with Jerry Garcia, is it like, oh man, that's Jerry Garcia? Oh man, what? Like, was there a little bit of fanboy that popped out? Or was it
There was,
just like, yeah, I know of him, but okay, there he is, and this is cool, but I'm not necessarily
yeah,
completely blowing up inside, thinking like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
yeah. That I would describe it more like what you just said.
Okay,
Uh, I was a fan of the Grateful Dead when their first record came out, and I was much younger back in the days of hippie world, and me observing all of that. And of course, the Grateful Dead were like, "Wow, this is a San Francisco band, and listen how crazy they are, and how all their influences." But that was it. I stopped
yeah,
listening to them right after that because I was, whatever. I thought of the Grateful Dead as a glorified garage band, and I
hmm
had played in many garage bands, and so it was like, what do I need to listen to this for?
sure, sure,
So, and I even told Jerry that, and he totally got it.
yeah,
I mean, it's I said that in the nicest possible way. So I wasn't a fan in that sense. I admired Jerry, but I knew a lot about Jerry's, the part that Grisman had told me about, about his love of all these different genres of music and everything else, not even just music. I mean, Jerry was like a well-read person. He
okay,
could talk. He was intimidating, actually. To tell you the truth, he seemed so intelligent because he would talk about William Blake or some poets and things. He was uh, totally fascinating. He wasn't condescending, but
sure,
he was totally, honestly, just really an intellectual, but not a blatant one. He just kind of like he genuinely loved a broad interest of deep art,
sure,
uh, and so I admired that in him. And I admired the fact that he loved so many different kinds of things, including lots of different music. And
yeah,
so I'm that way. So it was kind of fun for us to kind of share some of our experiences. So yeah, he became instantly more of a colleague, if not a friend. He wasn't, I didn't see him that often, or you know, he kept a certain distance,
sure,
particularly when we were playing, a show or something. He had his own dressing room or whatever, but we would hang out. But it wasn't. But he had so many friends that were close that would hang out, and he had lots and lots of hanger-ons
yeah, I can
that
imagine,
you can tell that were not really genuine
right,
friends. They were there because they had history with him that went way back, and he just tolerated that. So it was actually really interesting to see that whole world. And I was a little disappointed by that world being a little bit, well, not so genuine, not what I was used to in the music world, especially
sure,
the backstage stuff.
yeah.
Uh, and I was fascinated by the whole Grateful Dead. I guess I don't know what you would call it, but just how people acted around him or at shows. We
Yeah,
used to
just that
play the
whole culture of really, really exalting these musical figures into a really strong place.
well, also their. I mean, it was totally unique fandom. We'd play the Warfield, and we would play multiple nights. That was another thing I was not used to doing. Is with Grisman, we'd play one night. Maybe we'd play two nights at some show or something. But when Jerry would play, he kind of like owned the theater, for a week.
Right.
Play for, and so it was night after night at the Warfield Theater, big place. And the second night, I realized, wait a minute, these people standing in the front here, they're all the same people, and they're all in the same spot.
Yeah, right. In the same
And
clothes.
that's what it is. That's what a Grateful Dead thing is that
Yeah.
it's kind of this culture of like, okay, well, this is my spot. I'm going to be here, and this anyway. That was fascinating, and also at the end of the show, Jerry would be whisked off by limousine or something
Okay.
right after the show. So there was this whole other kind of like stardom kind of world that I was not used to.
Sure.
But that was out of necessity, I think. Jerry just was exhausted, and there's lots of exuberant fans that would show up at the stage door, but he'd be whisked off, kind of
Right.
Elvis has left the building kind of thing.
Right.
So
right.
that was an interesting thing.
Everybody who is in that band, are they all coming from similar places of having very eclectic interests? Because it sounds like so far, that's kind of the core tenets of the group, is everybody bringing a lot of uh, different cultural ideas to create this music.
Are you talking about the David Grisman quintet or quartet?
Yeah, either with Jerry or without Jerry, like everybody's really showing up with a lot of. They're not just one trick ponies. Where like this is a jazz guy or this is a bluegrass guy or this is a jam band guy.
Yeah,
was everybody in the group pretty well rounded?
Yes,
that's a terrible phrase to use, but I think you understand.
I mean, well, that's an interesting thing because we all had different interests or strengths on our own.
Yeah.
Like Joe Craven could play like a chamber style percussion, which was with bongos and rubbing on a case and using his mouth for percussion. So it was a unique thing that he specialized, and he also played the hell out of the violin and the mandolin. So he can play like Stefan Grappelli in that style, and he can do all kinds of things. So he was one guy, but he had to learn to do other things that David would demand of him, or the Jerry Garcia thing. We also worked at the time with Enrique Coria on guitar, and he's Argentinian and really specialized in classical style guitar and playing South American style. But he learned how and gained a love of bluegrass and then jazz.
Okay.
But there were problems with that because like jazz rhythm feel is that takes something it takes a lot of time and energy, and maybe you need to be listening to it for many years. So we had to accommodate with somebody like Enrique. There were times where we realized, well, this is as much as we're going to get out of him rhythmically, so we need to kind of balance it and maybe simple down our jazz thing. So yes, I mean, that band was, it was definitely directed by David's musical force. And then we tried to find how we can all come together to create an appropriate support for David's thing. And if it was playing a style that we weren't familiar with, we'd quickly have to learn how to do that.
Would he give direction? Like, would he hear, I think a lot of bass players have been put in context or situations, I guess, where they're with a leader who will either, no man, do your thing, you'll find it, and release you to work it out. Or, sometimes the same person will have a specific vision for the role of all the other instruments within a piece. What is the majority of the time with David? Does he kind of let you find it yourself, or is he kind of casting vision for you because he already hears something in his head and it can direct you in a certain way?
Well, I've been playing with him so many years that not much of that happens now,
Sure.
or did for many years. But early on, he would direct me to listen to Ray Brown. I mean, not that I hadn't, but that's what he had in context to do. And as a matter of fact, he actually recorded with Ray Brown on his second record, and Eddie Gomez, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow.
So David already had a broad sense of what a bass player could do and how,
Sure.
somebody like Eddie Gomez could fit into
Those are very
David
different
Singer.
bass players, by the way. Like,
Yes.
I mean, they're both within the world of jazz. They're coming from not opposite ends of the spectrum, but very different approaches.
Yeah. But both are equally instrumental at showing me what the bass can do.
Yeah.
And one, particularly with Eddie Gomez, the story I told you earlier, directly inspired me to move forward in my career. That's kind of, David isn't really a taskmaster. Well, unless he needs to be, unless he sees a weakness in someone, that it's not fitting his preconception of what his tune should sound like. He'll work with a player to get that to come together, and sometimes he'll let a player go if there's enough reason that he sees that person isn't learning what needs to happen. Or he'll
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, or he'll just recreate. His vision will change, or we won't do that tune. He usually will just push right through until you finally get it. But yeah, that's a broad thing too, of actually getting a stylistic kind of thing, because what musicians will do is kind of learn one formula to get through that song.
Sure.
But of course, the more satisfying thing is to hear the evolution. And
yes.
As a jazz player, you want to learn how to play in a certain way, but you don't want to play it that same way every night. You want it to evolve.
Right.
And if you're just kind of forced to play something that you're not really comfortable with, sometimes a player will just kind of start playing statically. They'll just learn the formula and never evolve further, and that's very frustrating, especially in the rhythm section. Because then it holds you back, and it doesn't allow space for one thing. When the Grisman band is all about multiple solos. There's the head of the tune. That's cool. But then it goes into the solo, and then you're improvising. The improviser is taking a solo while the band is accompanying that. That needs to change, I feel, with whatever the soloist is doing. So that rhythm section needs to be on their toes to stay dynamically supporting that soloist. And when the soloist is really busy, don't play so busy. Frame that to make it work. If the soloist is listening and wants to play like long tones, well, that means I'm going to have to. That's my framework will stand out. So make that firm and make it clear.
Kind of a rhythmic counterpoint.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Counterpoint is so important in bass playing.
Yeah,
and usually it's opposites, extremes that make the dynamics work, especially when you're trying to make a whole tune with multiple solos in it, not seem so boring. Because if you're playing rhythm like on a swing tune, and everyone plays exactly the same way through it, like you're playing 4/4 time. Well, I'm going to break that up for the next soloist, because we're going to take it down for the beginning of that solo. I'm going to change it into 2, and I want everyone in the band to hear me do that. Or if someone gives me that cue, I'm going to go there. Oh, I see. Good. Let's do that. So it's really, it is frustrating if you play with someone that's not quite, that doesn't have a lot of chops in a certain style, and you realize that that's all they got, this one formula that they do. Well, that's not going to work for a band, especially night after night. So that there were times where things like that would happen in that band. But
not in a way where everybody can. I feel like I've been in situations like that and played with people where it's like, okay, they do their thing, and that thing doesn't leave a lot of room for adaptation. And like, maybe it's satisfying for someone that came and heard it that night, but if you have to play that music again the next night, automatically as a sideman with that, it's just like, geez, here we go again. It really feels like a paint by numbers, because they are, and so it's entrapment. So now I have to almost, without completely losing it. I feel like it's because one person is sticking to a algorithm.
Yep.
It almost forces everybody else to, and it's so, not that it doesn't work for the listener, because maybe that's what the listener came to hear. I don't know what the perspective is, but I know for the artist playing with that, doing that multiple nights in a row, it's completely unfulfilling, and to the point where, like, I don't care if we're going to be night 3. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, this is so not satisfying for me.
You're totally right, and I feel the same way. And that's what I think that I do well, is I always try to make each performance, even though if I played a tune a million times, I always make it try to sound like it's the first time I've played it. And I expect the rest of the players to do that as well. And
Sure.
so you're totally right about that. And I think that my background of playing free improvisational jazz and being comfortable, relatively comfortable, and letting myself just go out and do that, that has helped me a lot to
Sure.
realize that there's not, it's not all formulas that I could rely on. It's the moment of appropriateness of how to accompany someone, or how to take over the reins, or to give someone else the reins. All of that happens in free music all of the time, whether
Sure.
you hear it or not. That's what you're thinking, or that's what you should be thinking. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, excuse me. Um, from talking to so many different bass players, obviously that topic comes up a lot. Is really looking for something new within the old. And sometimes it's old dated wise, or sometimes it's old as in, like, this is material that's maybe the band leader wrote it and it's only a year old, but we've played it a bunch and it's really familiar material. But always looking for something new in it, and coming from the head place, a hard place, emotional, spiritual, of kind of always being new life into it. And look, idea, because I do think if you play any standard for the first time, like standard of all standards, Stella by Starlight or something, and you're playing it at a trio gig or a quartet gig or something, that's the first time that tune has ever been played at that date, at that time, in that location.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it happened once. And so, I don't know, maybe cosmically, I don't know what the word is, think about it, it's the only time the tune has been played. Because this music is only going to happen once. I'm in the mood I'm in. The guys in the band are in the mood they're in. What we're bringing to this music right here and right now is only going to happen once. And I think releasing to that and being like, cool, what's it going to be today, fellas, is the ultimate. And kind of living in that momentary thing that I did not get the pleasure or the background of playing free music that you've had. I wish I would have. I wish I would have learned a lot of those things that way, because it seems like an amazing turn to these ideals. It's really, I think it's great, and I'm kind of jealous of it a little bit that you had that experience.
Well, I had to
be
go
brought
to
up in that
Europe.
culture of it, because it's.
I
Say that
had
again.
to go to Europe to find the opportunity to do that. That's the sad news, is that there isn't much audience for that here,
Sure.
unless you're, in a big urban area like New York or something like that. But even in San Francisco, I mean, there is, and I grew up with people like the Rova Saxophone Quartet, and with George Marsh, who's a really advocate for that kind of music. But we just deal with whatever. You learn a lot as a player when you attempt and that kind of music, that will help you in many other styles of music, and that's what I've used. Yeah. So yeah.
Before getting into the free playing, what was your jazz education like, or what was your jazz experience like? Actually, those are two different questions. What was your jazz education like, and then what had your jazz experience been like before entering into playing free? Because to jump right into the deep end, that seems like a lot.
Yeah. Well, in early years of college, I was playing a lot of guitar-based duos, and we played everything. We would look for gigs and just play them. We were just looking for opportunities to play.
Sure.
And in San Francisco, we would. I remember just kind of driving down Clement Street and going, "Hey, there's a pizza parlor. Let's go in there and see if we can just play for free. We'll just play for tips." And that developed into a really good duo. This guy Van Williamson, who lives back east now, but he was just a really good chord melody player. So we just kind of learned to play in that style, and we were listening at the time to like Ron Carter, Jim Hall duo.
Oh yeah. It's a good record.
And trying to play something like that. Sure. So that kind of context helped a lot. Playing standards, but with a stripped down world. And playing without a drummer. Sometimes we would play with a drummer, but being able to make the whole thing happen with guitar and bass. We did that a lot. I learned a lot just, self-taught, playing that way and practicing that way and all of that. So, and I did take some lessons with a few jazz bass players. That didn't last very long. Frank Tusa was one of those guys. One of his other students was Larry Grenadier, so I'd hear about Larry Grenadier.
He's gone on to do some things.
Yep. And but like, for instance, someone that grew up here in Pacifica, Mike Formanak, he's recording on ECM. He's he's a professor at back east and a great free player.
Yes. He's on I know of him because of a Tony Malaby record. I forgot the name of that record, but it was Tony's first record. Sabino, I think.
Oh yeah.
He's on that, and that's where I got into him. He's amazing. I'm a big fan.
Well, he grew up right near me, and I actually own the bass that he sold when he left, when he went off to play with Dave Liebman, and he moved to New York. So I've been playing his German flatback since then, and I've seen him since, and I think he misses the space. But anyway, no, it's he's made a total career of playing free improvisational and composing in that world as well. So I wish that I could have done more of that, but I practically needed to work. I needed to find opportunities to play, and I just took that experience of what the audiences in Europe gave me and tried to make that work here, playing whatever style of music I could find to play.
Yeah, and I think there's so much value in that, in really being able to put yourself in different situations and being fluid enough to adapt to those and figure out what that music needs. And it does really kind of force you to lean on your empathy to make the best musical decisions you can in so many different styles of music. I think there's a lot of value in that. To me, maybe more so than being known as just the guy that does the thing. There's a lot of high profile bass players that are known for doing that, which is great. That's the career they chose, and they're successful at it. More power to them. Ultimately, music's it's a big work. They work at their niche. It's something that makes them happy. Game on. Um, I personally find a lot of value in the variety of it all.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's it's very similar to this conversation here. You're meeting somebody and connecting with them, and hopefully having an enjoyable time with for the first time, in a new context, because this is definitely different than hanging out with the buddies that I know, and I know their backstory, and I know this and that. I like that. There's something, I don't know what it is, but I like it. That's kind of enough for me most times, is I like it.
Yeah. Well, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, when it comes down to it, too, life is as strange as this is. Life is more than music, too.
Sure.
We're talking about the accomplishments or how you're known in music. I've never, well, I guess I have taken a certain value of how I'm known. But really, my greatest accomplishment is raising 2 kids.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'm
great.
so proud of that. And they are such beautiful people that really gives me way more joy. And I'm surprised that I could say this, but it's true. It's really true. It's because basically what I've learned from music is how to be a better person and maybe a better father, or just a better human being.
Sure.
to be an example for my kids. So
What
yeah.
what shocked you about being able to say that? Are you thinking back to like a previous time in your life where like music was the sole focus and your personal worth depended on your music career?
No,
Is
I'm
that
saying
what
that.
was
I'm saying
so
that.
shocking to be able to say?
No, I'm saying that in the context that you're interviewing me as a musician, as a bass player,
Yes.
and we're talking in the context of people that we admire, and maybe how we perceive other people understanding us in the
Right.
context of music. And I'm just kind of like taking it out of that and saying, really, if you really want to know, I'm not all that. I mean, I am concerned about that, but I'm not as concerned about that when I compare it to my greatest accomplishment in
Sure.
life. And so I'm trying to frame that in a way. This is the way I get through life. Is 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 not make things so important that I'm going to be disappointed if they don't come out the way I am perceiving it to be, or my expectations. Because really, there's bigger things in life. And I learned that from my mother's death, my wife's death, and how I dealt with that. That's really the biggest lessons I've learned. Music has helped me get through that, and it's helped me to be a better musician by the fact that I've gotten through things like that in my life. And really, when it comes down to it, my biggest accomplishment, or what I'm most proud about, is just being able to hug my kids and go, and now seeing that they are, reasonably balanced adults, and and ready to take on this very different world
Right.
that they're dealing with. So
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's it, man. I think that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate. Like,
Yeah.
it's a good spot to put a button on it. Like that's, I'm not gonna ask you what bass strings you play now.
Yeah, well, that would take us hours, because I've never come down to any one string. Every bass that I own has a different quality, and it all demands a different string or whatever style I'm playing in. It's way, when we talk about gear,
All right, that was my talk with Jim. And I do want to give a very special shout out to Sarah Bennett at IVPR. She was the one that connected me with Jim Kerwin, and IVPR works for a group that Jim Kerwin plays in. The name of that group is the Nell and Jim Band. They just released an album on May 29th. The name of that album is Western Sun, and I have links to that at thebasshed.com as well. And also what Jim was speaking about, the kind of program, music, and place, I have links there to that as well. So you can kind of check that out and dig into that. So thank you, Sarah, for connecting Jim and I. I thought it was a great conversation. We did go on to talk about gear for a minute, even though I said it wasn't like the most appropriate time to talk about bass strings. Him and I did go into talking about gear, and I wanted to end this episode as that ended, like just like that. I thought that was great. The gear conversation is also up at a separate track. I'm not going to release it as a podcast episode, but it's also up at thebasshed.com/podcast. Click on Jim Kerwin, and he does talk about a really interesting piece of gear that I did not know about or existed, and it's really cool. So go check that out. For some of you might know, like, I don't talk about gear all that often, and I'm not necessarily like a big gear guy, but this one was fascinating. This one was fascinating to hear about, because it's like this real-time modeling of your sound, like this real-time analysis of your own bass, and it kind of spits it back out. It's really cool. So go check that out. And that's what I got, folks. And again, I want to I cannot bring attention. Yeah, bring attention. That's what I want to do. I do want to bring attention back to that quote of his that I still really find to be fantastic. Not make things so important that I'm going to be disappointed if they don't come out the way I'm perceiving it to be. Great little nugget of truth there. Great little nugget of truth. Wherever you are in the nation or in the world, I don't know if you're in the United States, things are a little hectic right now. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about all that because, one, there's a lot to say. Two, that's not the nature of this podcast. that's not. I'm not here to talk about that. Maybe offer a little reprieve from all that and just kind of get lost talking about music. And it's a nice escape for me most times. So that's what I got, folks. And stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, stay vigilant. And I will catch you on the next one.